Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Vinson, and I am the Director of Marketing for PDS Consulting Solutions. We are excited to share our very first webinar in what will be a quarterly on-demand series. Today, I'm joined by industry experts Kenneth Parsons, founder and CEO of PDS Consulting Solutions, and Tommy Britton, TBCS owner and PDS lead SME in Costpoint Materials and Advanced Manufacturing for PDS. In today's webinar, Kenneth and Tommy will be discussing Costpoint procurement. Kenneth, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome everyone to our first webinar. Happy to have Tommy Britton here, as Jennifer said, one of PDS's lead Costpoint SMEs focusing in materials and advanced manufacturing. Tommy and I have worked together for almost 20 years in this system, and we're happy to have him walk you through today some of the tips and tricks in Costpoint procurement. So Tommy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And what we're going to cover is one aspect of procurement, the generation of a purchase order from a requisition online. So when we have a requisition in Costpoint, we have a process to actually generate the PO automatically. So there's no double entry of the data. Once it's in the system, we're good to go. So this process that we're going to go through today in today's session is in about 5 sections. We're going to do a quick overview of the entire Costpoint procurement cycle, and then we're going to dive right into the requisition and take a look at requisitions that are in the system that have been approved and they're ready for the buyer to actually create that vendor PO. Then we'll go to the purchase order itself that's being created or has been created, and we'll look at the process of how do we get there? How do we get from a purchase requisition to a purchase order? What's the process that supports that? And then last, we'll take a view of some reports and inquiries within this process structure. Now, there's a lot more to purchasing than what is covered in this session, but the blue circle here that's highlighted is basically what we're covering in this session. So to look at the full process, a requisitioner creates a purchase requisition that I need something. I need to buy material, I need to buy a service, I need to hire a subcontractor, whatever that requisition requirement is, that's created as a requisition in the system. The purchase order, the purchase requisition is then approved through an online electronic approval process that can be 1 person, 7 people, 20 people. It can be as complicated as you want it to be. Once all the approvers have approved, the requisition then goes to the buyer, and the buyer begins negotiation with a vendor, getting ready to place the order. And the part that we're going to look at in detail live in the system, not just from card displays, was that the buyer actually creates the PO, and subsequently they're going to transmit that to the vendor. Following that, there's a follow-up. The vendor has to do their part. They have to ship the product to you, and then you're going to receive the product when it's delivered. And there's a data entry step to enter into Costpoint that the PO product or merchandise was received, and it may be inspected as well. And then it finally goes to accounts payable for the creation of a voucher in the system from the vendor invoice, and subsequent to that, cut a check and send the payment to the vendor, either through the mail or through an electronic file transfer. So that's the process as a whole. And we're going to focus just on this one little circle of how do we get the PO created from the requisition. So the requisition, basically, we're going to look at the requisition that's ready for a PO creation. We're going to look at the process steps to get that into the PO, and we'll actually run that process. And we're going to do this live in the Costpoint system, version 8. We can review the results of the PO created. And as I said, we're going to look at this in the live system. So here's the requisition that we're going to be working from. And I'm going to expand this a little bit just so it's easy to see the content, the requisition, who created it, and then it is under a defense contract. It might be a commercial type order, but this one happens to be a rated order. So we have the DFAR clause. It's 2 items, crimpers, a crimper and a crimp head, a positioner. So these 2 parts, we have a designated preferred vendor, which is Newark Electronics. We have our prime contract listed, and this is a rated order, so we see our DX rating. And then we have internally, for our own internal Costpoint cost controls, we have the project number for this particular acquisition. We have the direct material account, and we have the org that is responsible for this cost. And then we have the same information for line 2 of the requisition. So this is the first rec, and that's what we're going to work with in Costpoint. So the next step we go to is to apply PO info to the purchase requisition. And we have two requisitions here to select from. The first one, PR number 30, is what we were just looking at as a printout. So I have up here, I have my, essentially I have my header of the requisition, and below I have the lines. And for these 2 lines, quantity 2, quantity 4. So this is what I want to create a PO for. So my first step as a buyer is going to be to assign my defaults. And my default here, we identified Newark Electronics was going to be the preferred vendor. So that's who I'm going to place the order against. So I simply populate that there. The next step is to assign the requisition lines to the PO. And in this case, I know I'm going to issue both line items to a single PO. Both are going to Newark. So I can use this auto load button to automatically pull those lines in. And then the lines are loaded per the requisition. But if something happens that the vendor says, hey, I can get it to you early, I might just go in here and update the date. I'll use the calendar. Update the date from the 29th to say the 22nd. They say they can give us an earlier delivery date. So I can adjust that. So the PO will actually be created with an earlier delivery date, earlier than the requisitioner said they needed the material. And then I also, maybe I can negotiate a better price. And the requisitioner pulled up a price of $135.58 for line 2. And let's say I'm a great buyer and I can negotiate that down to $132. So I can make these adjustments right here in the screen. There's a number of other things we can adjust here in this process before the PO is created, but that's just a couple to give you an idea. So once I've done that, I save my transaction and I get a confirmation that the changes that I put in were successfully saved. And my next step is to actually create the PO. So I'll go to this screen and I'll identify the requisition number that I want to create a PO from. And this can be for a single transaction, or it can be a batch where I'm creating multiple purchase orders from multiple different requisitions. But we're going to do one simple just for this first illustration. And I've selected an option to both print a edit report of the PO and save the PO. So the PO has been created, but I can look in my download folder, and here is an edit report for this purchase order. This isn't the actual PO, but it tells me PO number 21-0001 has been created, and it lists the requisition that was used, PR number 30, line 1, and down here, PR 30, line 2. And it shows the changed dollar value. It shows the adjusted dates due March 22nd, and so forth. So this is what is actually going to be on the PO, although this is not the purchase order itself. So I'll close that and go back to my screen where I can actually look at what does the purchase order look like. So we'll print the PO now that it's been created. and I can preview this as opposed to printing it. So I have a lot of output options. I can email it, I can save it as a PDF and email it to the vendor later. I can hard copy it, print it, and put it in an envelope and mail it. But here basically is from me to Newark Electronics telling me to ship to my main warehouse. And the DFAR clause is at the top. And down below, I have my prime contract and my rated order flow down to the vendor. And then I have the details. And on the details, pulling out from the item record, we have a lot of additional information that I didn't put in the rec and I didn't put in the PO. Based upon this part number that's being ordered, I can see that it's manufactured by Daniels Tool Manufacturing. It has a mil spec part number. It has a Newark Electronics catalog number. And it's covered under a mil spec, and it even has an NSN number. So all of that was pulled directly from the part record and automatically populates the PO, as does the prime contract and the rated order. So the PO generation process is really pretty simple. This is a 2-page PO. There's the total is at the end on page 2, but this will cover as many pages as it takes to generate the PO. So now we'll go back to the item here, which was to look at how we're going to generate these lines. And one of the things I want to show you is the ability to split an order, split a requisition into multiple POs. Suppose I don't want all the line items of the requisition to go to the same vendor. So let's look at another requisition and step through the process of splitting a requisition into multiple POs. So we'll go back to our apply PO info, and we're going to look at another requisition. This is requisition number 31. And here we have 3 lines on this requisition. So if I look at this rec, the system is telling me that all electronics is the preferred vendor for line 1, but Walmart is the preferred vendor for lines 2 and 3. So how am I going to split these out into separate orders? Well, let's just do that. So all electronics is my preferred vendor, and I go down here as I did before, but instead of clicking the auto load button, which will pull all the lines in, I'll just say I want to convert line 1 of the rec, which is this part number, and the system assigns it to all electronics, and it gives me what the next PO is going to be, PO 21-0002. My quantities, if there's nothing for me to change, I can leave that as is. I'll close that, do a quick save to make sure that's locked in. And then I'll take the second line. I'm going to assign the second line to Walmart. So I'll change my default vendor up here, and I'll go back down here to assign PO, and I'll add a new line again. This time I'm going to designate line 2 of the requisition. And so that's going to assign line 2, which is a quantity of 3, to Walmart. And you notice it incremented the PO number. So now we have PO number 3 indicated for the new issue to Walmart. Now, if I want to go ahead and issue a third line, I can designate line 3, and that's the other part number to Walmart. And it's a quantity of 10. But guess what I find out? Walmart doesn't have all 10. They only have 5. So I can change my order quantity from 10 to 5, and I'll do a quick save. And now I'll go back up to the header of my PO, and I'll change it to, let's say I discover Mauser has some of this material. So I'll pick up a different vendor. Again, excuse me, that's not. Here, I'll add a new line to my requisition, and it's going to be line 3, just as it was before. And that pulls in the same part number, but it automatically assigns it to Mauser. increments the PO number to 4 for the next PO, and it picks up the remaining balance for me automatically. So I don't have to remember that I bought 5 and I needed 10. It'll automatically assign the remaining balance to the line. And you can break this down and split it out as many times as you need in order to get the material in or assign the services. So once that's done, we'll close this and do another quick save. And at that point, I'm ready to create 3 more POs. So let's go to the next screen, which is create purchase orders. And the requisition this time is going to be number 31. And I'll preview this. This is another option you can take to see what would happen if I crank the gears and actually create a PO. So this is that PO edit report. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you. So we have PO number 2 was created from this requisition 31 line 1. And then PO number 3 to Walmart was written for PR 31 line 2 and part of line 3 for a quantity of 5. And then I'll go to my next page. And here is my new PO number 4 for Mauser, different vendor. And my remaining quantity 5 right here for this piece. So that is simply a preview that shows me what will happen if I actually execute the process. So I can close that edit report, and here I can go and click on either create PO or print create PO. If I do this as I did before, what it's going to do, it's actually going to print a copy of the edit report we just looked at, and it's going to create the POs. So as I did before, I can look in my downloads folder, and here is the edit report we just looked at, which gives me a hard copy of what's supposed to happen when the POs are created. So the next step would be go to purchasing and look at what does that PO look like. So print PO, I'm going to print PO 2 through there we go. Print POs numbers 2 through 4. And I'll just preview this. So here are our purchase orders. So the first one is one line item written out to all electronics. The second PO, and that's a follow-on page. The second PO is to Walmart for 2 items. And then the third PO, that was also page 2. So here's the third PO, PO number 4, to Mauser. So what we can do from this process is I can take a single rec and I can split it into multiple vendors, multiple POs from a single rec. I can do that line by line, or I can take a single line and split a line into multiple vendors, typically because one vendor doesn't have enough and you can't wait. So we have the ability to do that either way. Another option would be to combine multiple requisitions onto a single PO. So if you've got multiple recs from different requisitioners and you, as a buyer, you knew that was going to come from one vendor, you can combine them in this process so that when you crank the gears and generate the PO, it has all of the lines on it from as many requisitions as necessary.
Tommy, do most people use the canned purchase order report out of Costpoint, or do they go into CER and customize it?
Well, that's a good question, Kenneth. About half the clients I've worked with use the canned PO report, and about half generate a custom PO that pulls in other information that they want included on that purchase order document, or puts it in a different format. Within Costpoint, you can either print it as a portrait layout or a landscape layout. but the content that is on there, the printed data, is essentially the same in either version. But sometimes you might want more information. So that's certainly doable. About half. Create a custom report for that. Okay, one of the other things I wanted to show you is a commitment report for a requisition. So if we go just to the requisition and look at what's coming down the pike, what are the dollar values? These are not actual commitments because you haven't obligated any funds. You haven't committed any payments to vendors based upon purchase orders, but this would be the dollar value of those commitments once these requisitions are generated into POs. So if you want to see that as basically a pending state, you can run this purchase requisition commitment detail report and see line by line, and it's sorted by project number, and see exactly what that is. The other process that we can run now that we actually have a purchase order is we can look at actual PO commitments. So we can run this for a specific project, or we can run it for everything, and then we can look at what kind of information is available. If I run this as a print compute, it's going to save this in history tables, so I can go back later and see exactly what commitments were last month as opposed to this month. Or it can be a real time as of today, right in the middle of an accounting period. So in this detail report, it's going to show you every PO number and line item that is generating an open commitment. And so these commitments are basically, these are pending POs. We could have an open PO. We can show quantity received and accepted, quantity received and accepted and vouchered. That is, once AP gets the invoice and they voucher it, then those are still all commitments, but this report will identify the exact status of that dollar amount. Is it open, not received, received, not accepted, accepted, vouchered, but not posted? Once it's posted to the general ledger, it falls off this report. So once you run the report again after AP vouchers are posted, your commitments would come down. So this again is organized in a number of different sort features, typically by project, but also by project account org. And so this can be a very useful report. And the basis of this report is also used to generate PO accruals to close the accounting period with the value of material that's received but hasn't been paid for yet. So let's go back to our steps here. So we looked at a requisition ready for PO, added the process steps, we processed it into a PO, we saw the results of that. So the next step is the PO. We looked at the PO, we looked at it as an edit report and as a generated PO. We can make changes to the PO through a control process to create PO change orders or mods. And then we looked at the PO document. I'm going to look at a couple more reports here for the POs. We have a purchasing report inquiry screen that is very useful for open PO commitments, PO status. So we have our PO, I believe this is the right one. Okay, so we can plug in our PO number that we want to inquire about. This is a great tool for program managers in finance and accounts payable, anyone that wants to see what's going on with a PGO. So this first line is our header of our purchase order. And at the bottom of our screen, we have a subtask here called purchase order lines. So we pull that up and we see our 3 lines. And if I just look at line 1, I can drill down to look at receipts. Do I have any PO receipts against this line item? So here is my receipt transaction. And all through this, we can toggle back and forth between a form view or a table view. I can see I received 2, I accepted one, so one must have been rejected. So if I look at rejections, don't have that one. Let's see. Oh, it's still sitting in QC. So we've received two, we've accepted one, but we've got one more still pending that's sitting in QC. I can also look at receipt inspections, and here's my QC inspection where they inspected one and accepted one, but we haven't done anything with the second one. So the system will track this appropriately. Maybe you need a part on the shop floor urgently, and QC doesn't have time to inspect both parts. They can take measurements and inspect one piece, send it out on the floor, then come back and do the other one. So Costpoint is going to keep track of those kinds of events real time as they occur. And then the next step would be, what about the invoice from the vendor? And here we see we have a voucher number 32 to Newark Electronics for $135.58 twice. So that shows us that because it's an open voucher, it has not yet been posted to the GL. If it is posted to the GL, it will show up in our history tab, which is blank at this point. And one of the things we can do once it's posted is drill down to see, has the check been cut? And we can see the date on the check and when it's going out. So if we need to talk to the vendor and tell them the check's in the mail, here's where we find that out. So let's go back to our charts, and we looked up the PO documents. And we went through the generation of one purchase requisition into a single PO, 2 lines to 2 lines. We took a requisition and we split one line into multiple purchase orders. We bought one from Newark and one from Walmart, I think it was. And then we split one line into multiple POs to 2 separate vendors to split a single line by slicing the quantity. And then I mentioned that we can do the opposite of splitting a rec. We can combine multiple recs into a single PO. And of course, we can also add lines to an existing PO. And we can do that through this requisition process. One of the things that's in the PO, once we generate the PO from the rec, is the rec number is embedded in the PO. So we know what requisition generated that line into the purchase order. So we had our requisitions, commitment reports. And we looked at a printed requisition. You can do an online inquiry like the PO inquiry. You can do that for a requisition as well. Within the inquiry screen, if the PO is generated, the PO inquiry will show you the requisition number that created it and show you the requisition line. From the requisition inquiry, you can see the PO that has been generated. And so you can basically get to either position from either of these. So I hope you've enjoyed this session as a learning experience. There are many other areas of purchasing that we may cover in future sessions. These are just some of the highlights of features that are managed within Costpoint. Vendor performance computation. So we have on-time deliveries, rejected, dollar values of rejected material, and so forth. We have requisition, the online approvals, which can be dollar valued or step-by-step, however you want to generate that. We maintain our vendor details about payments and so forth. Purchase order change control. We have a formal change control which locks in previous versions of the PO so they can't be altered. We have the open commitment reporting, which we might explore in more detail. We have PO accrual, journal entry creation, which is based off of the commitment report. And then in depth, we have a lot of detail to cover in receiving and QC inspection for receiving to close out the PO, and also for rejects and returns to vendor to receive replacements or accept credit from the vendor for returnable, non-replaceable items. And then the full topic of vouchering POs to pay the vendors for the services. So that's all I have for this session. I'm going to turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Terrific. Thank you, Tommy. If any of you have questions about today's webinar, please email us at info@pdsconsults.com or call us at 865-766-2092. Thanks again, and we hope you join us next time.